Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing with your hosts, Brian Salee and Michael Muilenburg, where business leaders across the industry share their unique challenges and insights.
It's almost like magic because it takes the learning process sometimes from weeks down to days, sometimes hours.
We want to help people within manufacturing and make them excited to come to work every day and go home safe to their family.
When you bring people in, they're anything but a machine. They're partners that can help you build your business, that can be your success if you treat them right.
And then you start having employees saying, when are you doing my machine? When are you going to come over here to my department? And now you get this buy-in.
This podcast is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier frontline digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations.
Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing. I'm Brian Salee, joined by my co-host, Michael Muilenburg. Michael, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to dig into this topic. You know, this is something you mentioned to me a few weeks ago. I know you've been traveling around the country and visiting quite a few factories lately, but you brought up kind of a trend that you've noticed recently, which is, I think the way you put it, a lack of focus on today's work. And so today we're going to dig in and we're going to talk about daily management and how to implement a system for daily management and why you should do that and how it'll help you. But before we dig into that, Michael, you want to tell us more about what you're observing in factories and this kind of lack of focus on today's work?
Yeah, Brian, it just keeps putting me in front and center when I talk to companies about the issues they're facing. And they usually lead with the war for talent and onboarding people and training. And then they go off in capital and TPM. But in every case, it comes back to a conversation about daily management. You know, I say, well, are you winning the day? How are you doing today? And do your employees know whether they're winning or losing? And all those other systems and things that you're working on are great, but what's the focus on today's work? And I get a lot of interesting answers. You know, we used to do that. We tried it. We're slipping. We've never done it that way. And it just seems to be kind of a fundamental gap that I'm observing across a lot of different industries.
Yeah. And when you say, you know, are you focused on today, the results of today? Did we hit our target for today? I mean, are you seeing companies that they don't even have a target for today, or they're just not reflecting on, did they hit that target? What went well? What didn't go well?
Recent observations are they're good at communicating sort of a daily target or maybe a monthly or a quarterly, either a financial or capacity, or if it's more of a like building equipment, are we hitting the target delivery date? But when you walk out onto the shop floor and you say, how are we doing today? They get a little lost. Well, I think we're doing okay, or that changeover went really well, but they don't really know until the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the quarter. And particularly with the operators, they're head down doing their work. And sometimes they don't really have a sense of where they are in terms of being ahead or behind.
Let's dig into this a little bit. I think, you know, we probably have some of our audience that maybe is already using a daily management system and some that this would be a new concept. From your background, what is a daily management system? How would you describe it?
Well, the short answer, it's a system that allows you to make everyone safe and productive and improving. So those are kind of the pillars. When you think about getting people together and having a conversation, you know, the beginning, middle, end of a shift, it revolves around, are we working safe? Has there been any incidents? Then are we hitting our targets? Are we able to follow our standard today? How's the quality? And then ultimately, you want to get to the point where how can we improve? How can we win the day? How can we maybe set up the next shift for success? So those are really the fundamentals of the system itself. And it really, in a lot of cases, it looks like a huddle or maybe even a shift change meeting. And there's nothing wrong with those. Those are great. They are more about letting you know where you are in the schedule and what resources you have and are the raw materials on their way, things like that. But I think a true daily management system focuses on that safety, productivity, and improvement.
Yeah. And hearing you describe it that way, what I'm thinking is this is really, you're giving yourself an opportunity, your teams an opportunity to reflect on the
Absolutely.
performance, And then really think about how do we improve the next day. So you're kind of, I would say, shortening that continuous improvement cycle maybe to where it's like a daily continuous improvement cycle.
Well, yeah, and even within the shift, when do you know that you're behind? Is it when when you start your shift, or is it halfway through, or is it 2/3 of the way? I use the football analogy. How do you know you're winning the football game? Well, you look up at the scoreboard. You don't look at the scoreboard at the end of the game. You look at it, after every possession, after every quarter.
Yeah, so this is really a way for you to keep score and then make adjustments. It's actually, yeah, the football analogy is so great because now I'm thinking, yeah, you go in at halftime, right? You know what the score is. You look at what's been working, what hasn't been working, and then you make adjustments so you go out in the second half and hopefully, you win the game. That's such a great analogy that I can relate with. A question for you around a daily management system. It seems obvious why you would implement something like this, but I see a lot of companies that we work with, and they're implementing maybe a digital solution like a Dazuki or maybe a training methodology like TW, or it could be a completely different project. And there seems to be a lack of focus on, where are we at today? Did we actually achieve what we said we are going to achieve this week when it comes to implementing this project? And so for me, my experience is mostly project based. Are you seeing the same thing where companies just don't have any short-term focus on bigger projects, and this could be a tool to help them with that?
Well, yeah, I'm going to make two comments on that, Brian. Is first of all, if the project that you're doing, let's say it's a new piece of equipment coming in, an effective use of that tier system is communication. It's allowing every employee to know what's going on, when the new gear's coming, when are we going to get trained on it, when are we going to turn it on and actually run it. You can send out memos and you can put things on the old fashioned information board, but the tier meeting is really a chance to communicate what's going on within the company, with what's going on within the project. So I think that's a huge opportunity that people may be missing. But back to the project side, I think those project teams can benefit from a version of daily management as well. They can have their own tier board, and it may not look like a production tier board with targets of productivity and waste and downtime, but it might be the milestones of the project. And as they get ahead or behind in the schedule, they can react to that. They can deploy resources. They can call for help. They can definitely communicate up and down the chain what's going on so that there's no surprises. So the daily management approach works for project-based things as well. But I like that linkage between the projects and really the support groups and the production floor, because my spin is always, we are here to support production. All the projects, all the capital, all the methodologies, we have to aim that at helping our employees on the front line.
Well, Michael, moving on a little bit here, you've used daily management systems for a long time. I'm curious, what are some of the maybe the most significant outcomes you've seen from having a daily management system in place?
I think, Brian, when it's done well, you see maybe an initial surge of everybody's identifying problems. You've unleashed the beast, everybody sees a problem and your board, your idea board, your inbox starts filling up. And that's a critical time. If you let it fill up and you don't address the issues, then people are going to get frustrated. They're going to stop making suggestions. But if you somehow swarm it and get some problem solved and you start getting some stability in your process, and people know that their ideas are going to be considered and they're going to be involved in the solution, it really creates a momentum shift and it starts building this culture of improvement where when the red light starts flashing or the metrics go south, people are not frustrated. They say, well, I have a help chain and I know it works. And so I'm confident I'm going to move forward and solve this problem. And even if my shift doesn't win, I'm going to make sure the next shift coming after me is going to win. And you start seeing that camaraderie. We're working as a team. It's not just, me and my crew. So I think that's the biggest benefit. You start by improving and solving a lot of problems, driving out some of that variation, stopping the surprises. And then you hit this stable, continuous improvement culture that helps you move forward.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you, Michael, because as you're telling me this, I'm always thinking through kind of the lens of the frontline operator. Obviously, worked with frontline operators for a long time, so I've got a lot of sympathy for them and understand a lot of the challenges they're dealing with. It seems like this type of system really would help with engagement. You're giving them an opportunity to suggest improvements, and you're giving them the opportunity, like the frequency right? It's daily, it's every shift.
Yeah.
So you're really engaging. Have you seen in terms of performance from employees, engagement, obviously suggesting ideas. Have you seen kind of significant turnarounds in employee engagement when implementing a system like this?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite stories is the focus was on changeover. So we asked the crew, what's an important metric for you? How do you know whether you're having a good day or not? And you might think that it was, number of yards or number of products output. And it was actually not that. It was how long did the changeover take? Did the changeover go well? Were there any surprises? Did we have to wait for maintenance? Did we have to wait for parts? So that crew started measuring their changeover times against a known standard. And they knew what the goal was, and they knew halfway through it whether they're going to meet it or not. And they were pulling the help chain. And over time, they were consistently hitting that time, which then made their production time more stable because it was more predictable. They knew that they were going to be down for an hour and then they were going to run and they were going to run at a certain rate. And so just by flipping it upside down, measuring the downtime, the changeover time instead of the uptime, it created a huge incentive because that's what made them feel like they had a good day or not. It was the pain of the changeover that made their day bad. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily hitting a production target.
That's such a great story. That's such a good example. And then again, the frequency, right? Of did we win the day? Looking at that number, how long did it take us to do that change every day? That short-term focus of that one metric. Gotta imagine, yeah, that drives a lot of motivation to during the shift.
And I think that the action is really at tier one, which is somewhere during the shift. I prefer to have that meeting about halfway through the shift because you've got some production under your belt. You've been running. You can make some judgments on how you're doing. Some people do it at the beginning. Some people do it at the end. I kind of like the middle, but there's also a concept. I call it tier zero. And that's where your lead operator, maybe your shift supervisor is checking and walking and asking, how's it going? What help do you need? Anticipating how they're going to do by the end of the hour, by the end of the shift or whatever. And a really good hands-on person that manages that, what I call tier zero, also just ignites a spark in the team. They know they've got support continually. Every hour of the day, they've got somebody checking and saying, is there any help you need? How we doing? And it's not pestering them or looking over their shoulder. It's sincerely offering help. Do you need something? Is there something I can do? Is there something I can help, get maintenance or engineering involved early so that when we get to our tier meeting, we're going to have a better picture of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back, Michael, because I want to make sure we cover this too. Is I've heard you mention now multiple times about tier meetings. Could you just describe tier meetings and kind of that structure and how does it relate to a daily management system? Is it a requirement to have a tiered system in place as well?
I think if you Google tier meeting, you're going to find all kinds of different models. And it's tier one, two, three, four, five, which goes from the shop floor all the way up to maybe the director or the vice president. But what really happens in the factory is that tier one is shop floor within the work cell. Tier two might be a group of work cells that are tied together. They may be upstream, downstream of one another. Tier three might be an entire value stream within the building. And tier four might be the entire site, which would include utilities and HR and all the support groups. So I kind of like looking at the site as a unit. And a large site might have four tiers because of the complexity of the processes. Each one of those tiers then will have an agenda for their meeting, when the meeting happens, who leads it. And really, again, they're going to talk about safety, productivity, and improvements. As you go up the tiers, they're going to be talking more about bigger system improvements, trying to head off some problems that they're anticipating throughout the day or the week. But you get down to tier one and even that tier zero I mentioned, it's really what's happening right now, what's happening within this shift. And you facilitate that discussion by looking at metrics. Usually the team will choose their own metrics that guides their work in terms of productivity, quality, even development, and of course, safety. But your mileage may vary. You may emphasize some topics and de-emphasize others depending on the environment you're in. But that meeting is a short meeting. Usually it's 5 to 15 minutes at tier one. It might be a little longer at the upper tiers to discuss that and then ultimately come up with an action plan and make assignments. And so the next time that you meet, you talk about those actions. Did they get completed? Are they still outstanding? Are we falling behind on that? Or did we try to solve the problem, but we were not successful? So there's always a look back to what happened the day before and are we making progress forward? So it's just a structured set of meetings. The other part of daily management, I'm just going to mention this briefly, but strategy deployment, having company mission, vision, and company goals and keeping that in front of people is also very important. And you can use the tier meeting to help communicate that, to keep everybody aligned. I tie in layered process audits as well, which is really process owners going with a partner and auditing processes and saying, are we following the standard? You may find out that you're red on your metrics because you're not following the standard or the standard is not effective. But you can also capture that during a layered process audit. Some people call that Gemba walks. I prefer L because it's a little more structured. And then ultimately, it all feeds your CI system. You got to do something with that information. So the outcome is now I've had a meeting. I know I'm off target. I have an idea. Now, what do I do to improve? And so that's the last part of the system, probably the most important to get the work done.
Got it. So as I'm understanding it, then your tiered structure, that's part of your daily management system.
It's a part.
And got it. And let's say you're a company who doesn't have a daily management system in place right now, and you wanted to get started. You've got the various tiers, but could you just focus on that tier 0 or tier 1, as you're saying, and really focus on that front line? Is that common to just start there?
Yeah, there's differing opinions on that, of course, Brian. My approach, I really like tier 1. I think tier 1 drives the whole operation. And my guess is that most operations will have a huddle or a shift handoff anyway. And so I would just simply bolt on the tier structure as I described and start with a metric or two and start with a conversation about how we're doing against that metric and how can we improve. And you may end up with a full dashboard. You may have 5 or 10 metrics and the meeting might be a little longer. And there may be even some additional players that enter into the equation in terms of resources. But I would start simple with a metric or two and just a regular rhythm of meeting and starting that improvement cycle that way and build from there. Having a site-wide tier meeting, they probably already have a staff meeting. Most plant managers have a staff meeting anyway. That's not the same thing as a tier meeting. So there's another opportunity to bolt it on at the leadership level. And then maybe if you have a tier 4 and a tier 1, you start filling in the gaps in between as you build some confidence and some experience.
Got it. And just to go back, let's say you're doing a tier 1. What are some example metrics that, you've often focused on in your career?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of supporting, obviously, the company goals, but I don't want to regurgitate production reporting or metrics that I can go to a system and I can pull data. So I wouldn't regurgitate those at the tier 1 level. I would ask the team, what's important to you? The example I gave you, downtime or changeover time was more important to an operator, their sense of how we're doing compared to the output that they produce. I've seen other ones where they'll just measure unplanned downtime. And that's a leading indicator of maybe an opportunity for TPM or some capital investment in equipment. That's when the pain hits for the operator. The machine goes down. When things are running great, the widgets are coming out 100 per hour or whatever, that's boring. But when the machine crashes, they get excited. And if that gets resolved very quickly, they're going to feel like they had a good day. So those are a couple around the productivity metrics. I've also had one where a leader asked me about the culture and about the engagement, and he was measuring attendance at his tier 1. And I said, do you really want people just attending the meeting or do you want them participating? And you know the answer, of course. He said, I want them to have a conversation. I want them to brainstorm. And I said, how about you just measure smiles? You look around the group as you're leading the meeting and you count how many people are smiling as you're facilitating the meeting. And that's going to tell me what kind of culture you have. It's going to reflect on you as a leader. It's also going to reflect on the team and their spirit. And I said, maybe it's not a long-term metric. I don't expect you to be measuring smiles for the next 5 years. But I said, maybe the next 90 days, you want to just measure smiles. And he thought I was kidding, and I was not. I was dead serious. And he went off and he did it. And he measured smiles and he started finding ways to engage people in the conversation. And he was getting a reaction. He was getting smiles out of them. And after, I don't know, it was 90 days or so, his smile level was at like 85%. And he felt like, okay, now we can get more serious about other forms of engagements. Maybe we can measure the number of ideas that are generated or the recognition that people are giving. We want to measure that. We want to recognize people. But it started with a simple Are people looking at the floor and twiddling their thumbs and waiting for the meeting to be over, or are they really committed to the process of improving?
Gosh, that's such a great tip, Michael, because I hear the word engagement, right? And that's part of the reason why you would have a daily management system is to engage those operators. And then I hear you saying, well, maybe you should just ask the operators what the metrics should be. So you're really starting to empower them, which I'm sure you've seen it. I know I've seen it. There's nothing more powerful in manufacturing than when you have an engaged front line. And so that's a really great tip. I want to move on and transfer over to as you go about trying to implement a system. Let's assume we've got some supervisors, some team leaders out there who are listening and they want to get a system like this in place, but this is their idea. It's not being pushed down from the top from management. How would you suggest they get started? Who are the stakeholders they need to get on board with implementing a daily management system?
Again, focusing on tier one, you may be lucky and have a very charismatic, personality driven supervisor, and they can engage the team, bring in this new process, start small, start with the metrics, focus on the improvement aspects. But one of the challenges is that the personality is going to fade. The person's going to get a different job. Not everybody's going to be able to lead that meeting the same way. Not everybody's going to engage the team the same way. So you really do need to build some structure over time that can be transferred from person to person, and they can learn it and they can develop. The other thing is, and this is a gap I see a lot, is the frontline supervisor, very often the person that's leading and coaching and maybe even developing that tier one meeting is really overwhelmed. They're doing HR activities, they're doing production reporting, they're doing firefighting. And so I think to be successful, you have to really look at that job and say, what is the job of the supervisor? In my words, I say their job is to coach to the standard, help identify deviations from the standard, and then coach for improvement. And so doing HR and paperwork and IT systems and whatever, that's taking them away from that job. And so if you keep them focused on those activities, then they can focus on that tier one as their primary work mechanism. They're leading it. They're going to get the benefit out of it. They're going to be reporting up to management as well. I think that's it. Get a supervisor that's can focus on those areas, start small, and then let them drive the process. It'll take some time, but it'll come around.
Do you typically see with a daily management system like this at the tier one level, it's supervisors, it's team leaders? Do you ever see a rotation of bringing operators in, maybe on a weekly basis to run the tier meeting and give other people an opportunity to grow and develop that skill set?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it doesn't revolve around a single team leader. That person is not going to make every single meeting every day, every week, every year. So yeah, they should definitely coach an apprentice, a backup, coach them to that standard process, help them learn how to run the meeting, have them do a couple trials and do a feedback session. But something even better than that is as you're discussing the various parts of the tier, so the safety, the productivity, the improvement, is you could call on people from your team to facilitate that part of the meeting. So I might say, hey, Brian, tell me about that safety thing that you were talking to me about in the hallway the other day. Could you just make that the safety minute today? And so you would lead the safety portion of the meeting saying, hey, I made an observation. Here's what I learned. And then maybe you even review the safety performance of the team for that week. I might say to another employee, that metric of changeover is really important to us. You led the changeover this week. Could you comment on that metric? Tell us, are we doing well? Are we falling behind? What have you learned? What are some improvements we can make? And so you, section by section, even metric by metric, you might move the leadership of that part of the meeting to different people on the team. It's a great way of doing it. Also gives them a lot of confidence that they can address what's going on in their work environment. And I think it helps them develop that skill, not just confidence, but some accountability. I own that metric or I own that part of the process.
And Michael, when it comes to, as I'm hearing you talk about ways you can go about getting people engaged, there's some planning that needs to happen for these tier meetings, but you're really covering the same things oftentimes over and over. You just might be bringing in different people, and maybe some days you might skip certain topics. So it's not like a ton of planning has to go into this every day. This is something that should happen pretty naturally once you get the system going.
Yeah, once you build it and you have your metrics, which you should probably be reviewed about every 90 days, saying, do I have the right metrics? Maybe more often if something changes in the process. But no, the meeting structure is pretty much laid out. And what I am seeing a lot of people trying to digitize the daily management system. And I'm old school. I like whiteboards and I like tally marks and I like hand drawn graphs. But what that implies is somebody's got to go find that data and put the dot on the chart. And that can take a lot of time. So I'm not opposed to automation. If you feed digital data to the board and then the team is equipped to discuss it, that might be great. But you can't get too attached to those metrics. You're going to have to call your IT people and say, my metrics are going to change at the end of the quarter, so I need a little help. So I get the new feed with the new metrics. So I wouldn't over automate, but some automation is definitely going to help you speed up that meeting and speed up the discussion.
And that other point there you just mentioned, I think sounds really key, is that the metrics should change. You're not going to be always focused on the same metrics, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier from my experience. It's around project management. There's some big projects that operators are often involved in, but how often are we talking about those projects and next steps and the success or lack of success we're having? That might be a short-term focus with a daily management system, maybe for a month. And so the ability to focus on different metrics and different topics is really key for the system to work, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm sure you've experienced this, but in project management, there's only 3 metrics, right? It's time and it's scope and it's money. If they work together for 90 days, you may have to really crank on schedule because you're falling behind. And once you get caught up, you might start looking at the finances a little bit and monitor that a little bit more closely as you bring the project in for a landing. So the same thing happens in project management.
Yeah. Well, Michael, this is great. I think, what I like about this is a framework. The way I'm interpreting it, it creates discipline. We're meeting every day. It creates visibility. And then the thing I really like about it is it creates engagement, which oftentimes can be very challenging in a factory, especially larger factories. So it seems like a really great system to get in place. Are there any resources on the internet? I know you mentioned, you could just do a Google search, which I did and found tons of resources, but do you have any preferred resources that you would recommend our listeners go check out?
Yeah, for the people that are really designing the system, there's a couple of resources I really like. I'm a big fan of the book Own the Gap by Mike Martin and Brian Crowell. And it's really the story of the Autoleave airbag factory out in Salt Lake City. And they really walk you through all the elements of a fully functioning tier system, how it affects the shop floor, how it affects management, what are some standard approaches. They've got some great examples, even outside their industry. So I think that's foundational. It's pretty easy reading as well. If you really want to get into the weeds and design a system well, the other book is Leading Your Business Forward by Shane Yount. It's Yount. Shane's a friend of mine. He's one of the best in the business, I think, in terms of coaching the tier process and helping you build that. His book is excellent, gives you kind of a roadmap. He also does a lot of public speaking. He's got some webinars and some online content as well. So that's probably where I would start. Those are the 2 resources that I fall back on. They just get it. They've lived it. They've implemented it. They've got some great stories that will inspire you to build a better system.
Great. Well, Michael, again, very great episode. I appreciate you sharing the insights and look forward to our next episode together.
Yeah, this is a great topic. Thanks for bringing us to the top of the list, Brian.
Thank you for listening to the Voices of Manufacturing, brought to you by Dozuki. To stay up to date, subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit dozuki.com/podcast to learn more.